This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more.
Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange with me, Arthur Parkinson, guest presenting this episode. Sarah's having a week off, but I'm delighted to be talking to Beth Gregg, who I've now met a few times. I found myself shortly before Christmas going down this beautiful country lane with these high hedges to Beth's incredible workshop, which is like something out of Charles Dickens, minus the electric lighting, where Beth creates these most incredible cloches completely by hand out of glass and metal. And what Beth's trying to do through her amazing company, who I'm sure some of you have heard of, called Claverton Cloches, is bring back the beauty of what was a staple in the English country and walled kitchen garden, which is the cloche, the beloved cloche, which in modern times some of us now know as a cold frame. But I'm so excited to talk to Beth today about all things cloches and her story of how she's become the Goddess of Cloches, really. So welcome, Beth. So nice to have you here. And just tell me, I suppose, what made you suddenly want to revive what is the cloche? Because we've kind of forgotten what the cloche is, haven't we, in the garden scheme of things?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for the intro. Goddess of Cloches is not a title I've heard before, but I'll gladly accept it. Yeah, you're completely right. Cloches are sometimes a bit of an overlooked garden apparatus, but they are just so incredibly helpful, especially when you have a garden that is, you're a little bit sort of tighter for space, and there just isn't really space to put a greenhouse. We sort of started making cloches 4 years ago, and where we were living at the time, it was right in the centre of Bath, and it was a really small garden, almost really more of a terrace. And it was great because it got, the sun on that spot was really fantastic, but it was quite exposed. It could be really very windy, and we wanted something to grow on seedlings and grow things from seed outside that just looked nice. And a lot of the things that we could find didn't look particularly fitting sort of for this sort of garden in Georgian Bath. And if they did look nice, then the problem was that they were light, and we were pretty worried that they would blow away because it was quite a windy garden. So Yanis, who's my partner and also business partner, although he doesn't do any of the day-to-day with Claverton Cloches now, he had seen Victorian cloches as a child at Audley End House, and they'd sort of lived in his mind since then, and he didn't even know what they were called, but he said, I've seen these things and I think they would be perfect for this garden. And so a bit of digging around on the internet sort of gave us the name, and we thought they would be, I suppose, easy to buy because people make great reproductions of all sorts of things nowadays. I don't know, chimney pieces or lanterns. You can buy amazing reproductions of all sorts of things. So we thought someone would be making Victorian cloches, and it turns out nobody actually was. So we started. And that's basically, that's sort of that's just how we got going. We made some for our own garden, and I suppose we couldn't really just make one, so we made a dozen, and within a fortnight they'd sold, and people were asking us when we would make more. So
the prototype, was that just an evening of Googling the old Victorian cloches, and Yanis found a design that he then amazingly was able to put in production? And you, clearly you're both very skilled at metalwork and glasswork. Wow, what a couple.
We weren't at all then. Neither of us, I suppose we're handy, but we definitely had no experience with anything like this or any kind of manufacturing or design. I'd worked at a desk job before and I studied science at uni. So I had no design background at all, although it's always something that I've been really interested in. And how we sort of got making them was that Yanis and I started looking online, found out that they were called Victorian cloches. And then we hunted one down, which was actually pretty hard. You'll know if you've looked for one of these. I'm sure some of the listeners will have. That Victorian cloches, the antique ones, are really hard to find. And the ones that you can find are often in states beyond repair.
Yeah, so like at the cattle auctions, aren't they? Or half battered.
Yeah, exactly. They just sort of look like bits of old metal by that point, really. And so we found one at an auction and drove up to Yorkshire to collect it and brought it back home and sort of promptly started designing ours based on that old one. So we bought calipers. Yanis measured every single dimension and then taught himself how to model on the computer, sort of modeled it all out in 3D online. We bought a 3D printer. So we printed it all at home, each component, and sort of stuck it together with super glue. And we essentially ended up with this exact replica of the old cloche. We sort of had them sitting side by side. One was antique and we had a cloche that we'd sort of designed and printed in plastic sitting beside it. And it was a like for like reproduction. I mean, of course, there was quite a lot of trial and error within there. But once we had that sort of design file and we were really happy with the shape, it meant that we could start approaching foundries. And we found one that was like willing to work with us in a really small quantity. And, a few months later, really, we received the first frames in, which was so exciting. And then I suppose there was a bit of a moment of the initial excitement and then oh no, what now? Because I had no idea how to cut glass or putty or do any of those things. And we turned our spare room into a sort of makeshift studio, putting cardboard all over the carpet so it wouldn't get covered in putty and paint. And and promptly got to work teaching ourselves how to glaze. So quite a baptism of fire, because at this point, people were also sort of asking, people were wanting to order them from us. So the pressure was on a little bit.
Can we have one? And you'd only just made one for yourself. I mean, what I love about your story, and I think often what it seems to be a pattern of people that want something beautiful, but it isn't available. I mean, you do remind me quite a lot of Emma Bridgewater, and the reason she started making her own mugs was because she couldn't find that mug that she wanted to give to somebody as a present, and look where she's got to. And having visited your magical, very intense little workshop where you're cutting the glass, and literally everything on these cloches is done by hand, everyone. I mean, I walked in and everything is just laid out like a little, a proper serious workshop, but everything is done by a human hand, either Beths or who's that lovely girl that was
Georgina,
in there?
Georgina G, who works with us, who's amazing. Yeah, I would be so lost without her.
We should talk to you because we're talking on quite a cold late April day. The spring has been very cold. So the whole reason, as well as something that was beautiful, was you did want to use it for something practical. What was the first thing that you grew in your cloche when you eventually made it?
So when we eventually made them, we eat lots of spicy food at home, and big fans of a lot like Thai food, Mexican food. So we grow lots of chilies, and by the time our cloches arrived, that particular time of year, it was perfect for putting our chili plants under them outside. Chili plants, as you know, can be a little bit finicky if it's too cold. So they could go outside into a cloche, and we were really able to seriously grow our chilies under those. We've done things like basil as well. It just keeps going under there too. But at this time of year, I mean, it's really cold now for late April. I mean, we're nearly in May. And in my garden at the back, I've got kale under there. I've got my chard that's still under a cloche. I have planted out some of my annuals, and I've got them under there more for protection from all sorts of nibbling things that I have in my garden. But yeah, I had my sweet peas in there actually until quite recently. They've just come out. Oh, and actually I put my cosmos under there the other day because they're now outside, but they're still a little bit tender to leave uncovered. So they're sort of hardening off under one as well.
And it's a lovely time to be just talking about the kind of rules of keeping your lovely seeds that you've nurtured on the windowsill alive. And the reason a cloche is so helpful is it is often wind rather than cold that will kill your seedlings. So you do need to be putting them under cloches to harden them off, as Beth said. And Beth, do you find that creepy crawlies and things have a hard time getting into the cloches? Do you give your cloches a carpet? Where do you like to put your cloches in the garden?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's certainly really effective with certain garden visitors. I mean, it keeps pigeons, squirrels, blackbirds. Yes. Someone I spoke to recently even said they had a peacock in their garden which would eat.
Yeah, they would eat you out of house and home, wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really helpful for birds or small mammals. We have lots of slugs in our garden, which is a bit of an ongoing problem. It has improved, but there's still loads there. And we find that when I use cloches, it's not entirely eliminating the slugs from being under there, because they can still, come up underneath through the soil. But it's a really good deterrent. They're generally going to sort of, I wouldn't want to say entirely stop them from going in, but it does really deter them, especially when you have those really tender young leaves. I know in previous years I've put cloches over my dahlia tubers when they're just putting out their first shoots, because the slugs just love them so much, and that has been quite effective. They have been quite effective at keeping them off. I think they'll then probably go for the next thing that's uncovered instead. So it's an ongoing battle.
Because I think it's important to talk about the two different types of locations you can have your cloche, isn't it? You can have them by the door on hard standing with your seedlings and seed trays in, but you can also have them in the actual flower or veg garden, can't you? Because they do, once you've got that lid on, they do heat up that patch of soil quite significantly, don't they, Beth? When it's, a spring, even a winter's sunny day.
Yeah, you can feel, the difference is really remarkable. You just sort of, as soon as you lift the lid of one and the sun's been out, you can almost feel that like warm air escape. It's really noticeable, and it really helps to warm that soil. So it's ideal if you're planting out, if you want to plant directly into the soil, you can have your cloche on there for maybe a week or so before, and that can help to pre-warm the soil. And that does really give the seedlings quite a head start, other than going into just cold soil. But it's an interesting point you say about whether the cloche sits on soil or on hard ground. When we first, in our old house where we first created cloches, the garden there was more of a terrace. So it was mostly sort of, I suppose, hard landscaped, and we would grow everything in pots or containers, and then we would have the cloches placed over them. Whereas now we have sort of beds, and the cloches tend to sit in soil. Although this year I've got so many vegetables in sort of trays still and in pots that I've still got the cloches over them on hard ground. So in that way, they are quite effective. I know some of our customers, have huge kitchen gardens where they're put to work in beds, but other people are maybe in a more urban setting. Maybe they're even growing on a balcony where the cloche, is covering things that are in pots instead.
Yeah. And they're beautifully heavy, these cloches. It's amazing how heavy they are, actually. I don't think even a muntjac deer would be able to knock over one of your cloches once the lid's firmly on it. But talk to me about, because your cloches suddenly went live, as to speak, where people could buy them during lockdown, wasn't it, sort of? You kind of just managed to get going as lockdown started, and then you've shipped your cloches and posted them all over, not just the UK, but they've gone all over the world, haven't they, Beth?
Yeah, they have. They've gone. Gosh, we've sent cloches all over. I think the most obscure location that some went was a tiny island. A really tiny island off Tasmania, off the coast of Australia. Quite a not insignificant amount have gone to New Zealand, which I suppose sort of makes sense because parts of New Zealand have quite a similar climate to the UK, but it still sort of blows my mind to think that they are, that from our workshop, they're literally on the other side of the world. And we send a lot to the US as well, a lot to, or at least some to Scandinavia. I guess it's just so cold there that plant protection is probably very welcome. And then, we send some as well to places where I wouldn't necessarily think they would need a cloche. some of the warmer US states, maybe Texas, maybe Southern California. But of course, they're ornamental as well. You know, they really add a lot of sort of architectural interest to a bed, and they have that period charm that I think just looks so
They're very
so
period
sweet.
drama, aren't they? Very period
Yeah, they
drama.
are. So I can see why some people, you know, why that's quite an attraction as well, even if they maybe don't necessarily need them just for growing.
Has there been anywhere that you've reintroduced cloches to that would have originally had them in any of these like old walled garden type revival things that are going on in the UK?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. By coincidence, 2 weeks ago, I was doing a really sort of a bit of a tour of gardens that I've wanted to visit for a long time in East Anglia. And a few, maybe 2 years ago or a year ago, we got an order for some cloches from Holcombe Hall. So they have a fantastic walled kitchen garden there. In fact, it's not just a walled kitchen garden, it's a huge walled garden with all sorts of gardens within it. It has vines, it has event space, it has tons of glass houses, ornamentals, all sorts. And they've really been restoring it over probably the last decade. It's been a mammoth project. I mean, I don't know if you've been or seen it before.
I haven't. Yes, I have. Of course I have, because we've taught there actually a while ago now. But yeah, we've been there. Yeah,
I mean, you'll know it's a huge project, and they ordered some cloches for the kitchen garden there, and I got to go and see them in use 2 weeks ago, which was so exciting to think that. Yeah, like you say, I suppose it's a reintroduction, because a garden of that size would have had cloches, and they have tons of glass houses of all different sizes. So the cloches looked really, just looked really in keeping. They looked like they'd always been there against this backdrop of old glass houses and old walls.
Part of the furniture, so to speak. Very much so.
Exactly.
You do two designs, Beth. One is a lovely square design, and the other is almost like a temple. What's the reason for one that's quite squat and the other being quite tall? Is that for maybe growing, as you've said, a pepper or something that's quite tall, and the square one is more for practical seed trays, or are you planning on doing more ornate designs for various things?
Yeah, we have so we have a square one, we have an octagonal one. The square one is a little bit bigger, although the bases can be stacked, so you can actually make that really quite tall, which is really helpful for things, you know, like chilies, or maybe
like a beehive,
maybe even
almost.
Almost that kind of height. You can really get a quite good height in there, which is helpful when, you know, maybe if there's a specific plant that you want to protect. Or I think we had that really, really awful frost 2 years ago that killed lots of sort of Mediterranean type plants, and I sort of wish I had my double height cloches in my own garden then, because I think I would have saved some of those things. But yeah, we also have an octagonal cloche, and it's also Victorian in design. So we visited Erdig Hall in North Wales near Wrexham a couple of years ago, and asked if they had any antique cloches, and they sort of brought us around the back of the greenhouses, and in there they had a collection of maybe, I don't know, a dozen or more antique cloches, and lots of them in styles that were new to me. I hadn't seen them before, and one of them was this incredible octagonal cloche, so 8 sides, and it just looked so charming. It was just whimsical, and it didn't, you know, it just looked a little bit more playful maybe than the traditional square design. And I thought, I just loved it. I thought we have to make this. But I would also really like to make a larger square as well, because the Victorian squares tend to come in 2 sizes. We make the smaller of the two, and I would like to make the big one. I suppose it just starts getting really quite heavy once you start to scale it up, because they are cast iron. So and you've mentioned, you know, they don't blow away, which is the great benefit, but we want people to still be able to move them around their garden, because that's the point. So just have to think about how we can do that and not make them the weight of a small car.
How long does it take for you to just make one cloche from start to finish?
Quite a few hours. Oh gosh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure off the top of my head, because we tend to sort of batch up, you know, we'll putty loads of them at once, and then the next day we'll sort of we'll sort out all of the detail. But yeah, we're well into the hours and hours. But it's worth it. I mean, they look, they're sort of made exactly like the ones from the Victorian period, with the exception that they're galvanized, so they will last even longer than those from the Victorian
which is just
period.
so wonderful. I mean, it is like an investment piece for your garden, what you're doing, but they're bespoke and they will last, won't they? They are the kind of thing that if you buy one, it will become like an heirloom of your garden. That's what I love so much about what you're producing. I mean, there's so much cheap stuff you can fill your garden with, but it will only last a season. Whereas what you're doing is something that really is going to live on and is honestly practical season, week by week in your garden. So I see them as such a wonderful, worthwhile investment that, as you've said, is not only practical, because the fact is, on a winter's day when the garden is sort of put to bed, as we speak, what could be nicer than that lovely white castle in the bed, just brimming with life? I mean, I can't wait to do, I've already planned what I'm doing with mine. I'm going to grow the florist's anemones in it. I'm going to plant the corms in the flower bed, loads of grit, and then the cloche is going to go on top of them, because I know all winter long it's going to help warm them up as soon as we get a little bit of winter sun. And I think, all your winter hardy salads could be sown within one, and any of the lovely, really early to flower polyanthus, they'd be worth cloching over, wouldn't they, for early flower? And it's all there, well, people who've got space for a polytunnel, but this is something you can, as Beth said, you can have it by the door on a balcony, small cutting garden, small potager type thing. They kind of belong, I think, in that kind of situation. So I'm so glad that you're bringing them back, and I can't wait to see what else you design, because you and Janice have clearly got minds that are just exploding with amazing design. I mean, I don't have a brain like that, but yeah, wonderful. You've done a hose pipe as well, haven't you? That's due to be launched.
Yeah, we have. We launched it just last month, and the reception to it's been so positive. After visiting so many beautiful gardens and delivering cloches to many beautiful gardens as well, I just wonder why the hose pipe just doesn't look nice, and when every sort of corner is considered, when the planting is perfect and the lawn is mowed, there's not a leaf out of place, or if there is a leaf, it's sort of it's sort of deliberately left there for that sort of more serendipitous feeling. But then on the wall, there's this massive sort of neon glowing hose staring at you. And I thought, I wonder if we can turn our hand to something like this. So it's obviously quite a new product or product category for us, but so far so good. It's a really beautiful, it's a British racing green color. It's in a nice matte finish. It's nice and supple, and it has really nice solid brass fittings. I just love brass because it sort of ages in really nicely, and sort of tying that back to the cloches. I want things that are going to continue to look great over time. Then you're not just buying it for a season or two. This is something that's going to be in your garden for a really long time. And so from that, you're not wasting money. You're not sort of hurting the planet with wasteful materials. You're just buying a garden thing, and it's going to last 3 years, and then it goes to landfill. You're buying something that's going to last for a really long time. So that's the idea with the hose. And I think that's it exactly. Yeah. Next up is hose reels.
Oh wow!
And then who knows? Maybe probably a few more cloches.
British garden industry is lucky to have you, if you ask me. You can buy Beth's gorgeous cloches through Sarah Raven, and they'll come to you in an amazing, very robust, lovely box for you to put them together, which is really easy. There's nothing complicated about putting the sides together. They come with these pins and very good instructions by Beth. But most excitingly, Beth, we should end on this. You are appearing with your cloches at this year's Chelsea Flower Show, so you'll be alongside us with a display of cloches, won't you?
Yeah, exactly. I am very much looking forward to seeing you there. It's our first Chelsea Flower Show, and since we've been going since day one, I think nearly every customer has asked, are you going to be at Chelsea this year? Will you ever do Chelsea? And so this year I thought, well, let's take the plunge and give it a go. That's it. So we're at the moment in full flow. We've got all of our all of our brassicas, all of our chard, all of our lettuces under cloches at the moment, growing them for the show. So
because you're going to have a little cloche garden, aren't you? To show off your cloches.
Exactly.
So
but try to do a little bit of a kitchen garden, exactly.
Wonderful. Well, you can follow Beth Claverton Cloches on Instagram, and as I say, we are also at Sarah Raven selling her cloches. So and you'll see her at Chelsea. So so lovely to talk to you, Beth, about the coziness and wonder of your cloches. And thank you so much for putting your brains into designing such a wonderful thing for our gardens, something that's both practical and beautiful.
Oh, thanks so much, Arthur. It was so nice to chat to you, and I shall see you at Chelsea.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Arthur Parkinson on Grow Cookie to Range. And next week, it's back with Arthur again, because we're off to Chelsea and we've been plotting and planning it now for over a year. But it's hotting up right now and we're really making sure our plants are looking good. And we're just going to talk about what we're hoping to deliver to all of you at Chelsea in May. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.